Now you're welcome, Max. So I'm sure, as you saw at this stage, there was a 14-minute delay to the world's most famous horse race on Saturday. Police ultimately arrested 118 protesters, at least 2 of whom were successful in attaching themselves to fences and causing the delay. Protest consisted of around 300 people. Not everybody get in over the perimeters, and they were part of the welfare group Animal Rising, and they've promised similar protests to come in the months ahead, and they've deemed their efforts a great success, and certainly their actions have put animal welfare debates on the agenda. Just to give a sense of the coverage, Mick Fitzgerald and AP McCoy, Grand National winning jockeys, both were on the ITV coverage with Ed Chamberlain, and they were critical certainly of what was happening. Have a listen.
These are horses that receive 5-star treatment from the minute they're born to when they die. And that's a point we want to get across. These horses are unbelievably well cared for, and in most instances probably better looked after than some people are.
They're attention seekers. That's what they are. And unfortunately, we're giving them attention because we're actually respecting them enough to let them to take them off the track.
Which we didn't want to, AP, but with the delay to the race, we've got to.
We didn't, Ed. Look, I didn't become a jockey because I wanted the Grand National. I said out this morning, I've forced this one brother. I've never rode a horse in my life. I'm not from a racing family. I got into racing because I loved horses, and I still have horses now that I retired. So, I think, if these people had that much care for it, as you said, they've never been to stables. They don't know. They have no real understanding of the horse, of how well they get looked after.
These horses are our lives. They're our lives, and like tonight when I go home, however long it takes me, whatever time I get home, my wife will be out there looking after them, and she will be first thing tomorrow morning. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job.
Sandy Thompson, the trainer of now deceased horse Hill 16, he was on TalkSport earlier on today talking about the death of Hill 16, fell at the first fence. Have a listen.
I can understand it, but there's proper ways to do it. And the proper way is not for them. This is actually, by them, it's actually a publicity stunt. They're not actually, if you go on their website, they're all about us all having a plant-based diet. So they've decided, making one of the biggest sporting events in the world, to make people aware of who they are. And, it hasn't come out very well for them because they have definitely contributed to the death of a horse. That argument will rage. They will deny it. But, we know our horses. We know what happens. The facts are there.
And just a final piece of audio. It caught the ear. I was about to say I caught the ear this morning. Nicky Campbell, for instance, on 5 Live. This has very much been big talking point across the UK media. Threw it out to listeners to give their views on the protests and on racing. Have a listen.
Kevin in Manchester, you kick off.
I sat down, I watched the Grand National, and all a certain racing team was talking about on a certain channel, was the welfare of the horses, at home. They're treated like millionaires. They give them what they want, But the one point that everyone's missing is, why don't they just lower the fences? Just lower them. The height of the fences and what them horses have to go through on that day, especially when it's a hot and warm day and the ground is absolutely rock hard,
Margaret, what do you think?
I don't like any horse racing at all. I don't like the way they whip them to make them go faster. I just think it's barbaric and I think it should be banned. I agree with the other gentleman, though. Lower the fences and have fewer horses out there because, 40 horses all running at the same time. They all want to get over them fences, so there's going to be animals that are going to be killed or hurt. I would not let my horse into the Grand National because I think it's just for money.
Good morning to you, Tommy.
My point was fairly simple. I just felt that a lot of these horses are bred to race, so if it wasn't for racing, they wouldn't exist. And also people were talking about it's all about money. I don't see what the problem is with making money, because money is what makes the world go round. So I don't see what the issue is with them making money. I would like to see them make it safer, but I don't see why it shouldn't continue.
Let me bring in Mark in Manchester as well.
Hi, Nicky. My point was the nature of the protest. I think since the Grand National fences were modified 10 years or so ago, there have been 9 renewals of the Grand National. And in those 9 years, there have been 17 falls or unseat to the first 2 fences, the most ever. I think it was 3 in 2014, 2015. This year, there were 8 falls or unseat to the first fence alone, including the fatality. I strongly believe that the protest and the nature and the timing of it was contributing factor to that. I think it caused the horses to become settled pre-race because of the delay. Look, everybody has a right to protest peacefully, but I think the untimely attempt to disrupt has done more harm than it did good.
So an array of views there on Nicky Campbell's BBC radio show. Very happy to say journalist, broadcaster in the racing world, Lydia Hislop, is with us on the show again. Lydia, really appreciate the time. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Can I just make a point about Animal Rising to start off?
Please.
They're an animal rights organisation as opposed to an animal welfare organisation. And I do think that is relevant purely in terms of what their end game regarding animals and humans' relationship with them is.
OK. Do you want to draw the distinction?
Well, I think that an animal welfare group would be something like the RSPCA or World Horse Welfare, who see that there is a place and a purpose for horses within sport, and animal rights, are more connected. If you have a look at the Animal Rising website, they wish to cease the use of animals for sport and entertainment, and also for food. And they have an agenda of rewilding. I say agenda in a non-pejorative sense, a purpose of rewilding and veganism. So my point is that they have wider, long-term, more sweeping objectives, which is in line with being an animal rights organisation as opposed to an animal welfare organisation.
Fair enough point. And I know they've promised further protests of this nature, but not just at racing tracks. They're also planning to go into animal farms, I suppose, and in bids to, I suppose, to use their terminology, rescue animals who've been bred for food. So they're planning more high-profile events over the coming months, that's for sure. For people who didn't catch the coverage over the weekend, how much did ITV show of the protest? How was it covered across that 14-minute delay, Lydia? What did the millions at home see on their televisions?
Well, I have to make a confession that I was working at the same time for a racing TV channel, so I didn't see this live. I've since seen some excerpts from the ITV racing, but they would have seen protesters trying to scale the fences outside the Grand National, using ladders to do so, and attempting to attach themselves to some of the early fences. And they would also have seen members of the police removing those protesters from the track.
Yeah. I mean, it was AP McCoy and Mick Fitzgerald very critical. I did kind of laugh at the phrase attention seekers being used. I mean, yeah. Precisely. So, that was the point of the exercise. It seems to have succeeded. I mean, I played, obviously, even the BBC radio discussion, and there are any number of articles which have been written which wouldn't have been otherwise. So in that sense, I would think Animal Rising pretty happy with how the weekend went.
Well, I think they received a lot of publicity going into the race, and I think it was quite one-sided as well, the debate going into the race. And I think that probably engendered a larger impact, and maybe more people that attending to protest than might otherwise have been the case. But in terms of its impact on horse racing, in terms of looking at the race and deciding how to continually reduce the risk factor for participants, that would be a process that would have happened anyway. It happens day in, day out for British horse racing. Fallers and fatalities and the reasons for them are analysed, and it is that data, scientific objective data, is used in order to make changes. For example, fences can be resited as a result. Most recently, Exeter University did some research which has meant that the sort of trimmings, the dressings on fences have been changed from orange to white, because research has shown that horses can see those obstacles better and therefore are more likely to jump them better. So as a result of what's happened on Saturday, whether or not a protest had taken place, what the events before, during and after the Grand National would have been routinely analysed, and any improvements to attempt to reduce risk would have been put forward. This is something that Aintree has got a track record of continually doing, in particular since the reviews in 2011 and the changes that were implemented from 2013.
It's worth also making the point for people who didn't see the race. Hill 16 fell at the first circuit, and so it would have been apparent to the millions who maybe only just watched this one race a year and who had just seen the protest. It would have been apparent that something was very badly wrong with Hill 16. So they would have been in no doubt as a viewing public that Hill 16 was in big trouble.
Yes, and I think it is fair to point out that there was a highly unusual number of fallers over the first two fences. I need to correct one of the callers into Nikki Campbell's show. It wasn't 8 departures at the first fence. It was over the first 2 fences. Since the fence modifications in 2013, the most seen is 1 year there were 3 over the combination of those 2 fences. Quite often it can be 2. Sometimes it is 0. So it's certainly there was an unusual number of fallers at the start. And it's a small sample size, but you have to feel that it points to something different having happened.
So that's the weekend. The broader conversation, which has been ongoing for some time, I'm curious for your sense of. It'd be my feeling that the anti-horse racing lobby is, well, if not bigger, certainly louder in the UK and has been for a number of years. And I would have detected, again, it's just almost anecdotal as much as anything, but even on ITV's Cheltenham coverage around the Gold Cup, there was a faller. Ultimately, everything turned out to be well, but the palpable relief I felt, on Ed Chamberlain's behalf and all of the commentary team's behalf, and just a general sense of nervousness on their part, and there were various pieces across the week to show the welfare of horses and how well horses were being looked after. It struck me as a sport, feeling the pressure and feeling under threat, Lydia. So be curious for your sense of where horse racing is in the UK in 2023.
Well, in terms of, relief where injury hasn't taken place, I think, again, that's a day in, day out feeling from people who are lovers of the sport and participants in the sport. You only have to go to a racecourse and see a racing crowd there, the people who have attended, and see them, waiting to hear about news from the horse. I regularly get racing fans contacting me via Twitter if I'm on television broadcasting. They want to know about the welfare of the horse and to hear that the horse has been safe or else has been receiving veterinary care. And obviously there is top flight veterinary care on all race courses, and because of the number of runners at places such as Cheltenham and at Aintree, that number is increased vastly in terms of the veterinary support team. But yes, I think in general, the conversation that Animal Rising say that they wish to have, which is the human relationship with animals, is something that is increasingly at the forefront, I think, of conversations amongst certain areas of our lives. I think you're right in identifying that maybe Britain has been having this conversation, and it's been getting louder for a little bit longer than Ireland. But I do think that Ireland will be heading that way as well. And I think it's to do with the disassociation with the rural world, the increasing urbanisation, potentially, the lack of familiarity with animals having a purpose as opposed to being a pet of some sort. And so I also think that social media, and again, I mean this neutrally, has linked up like-minded people. We've seen that for good and for bad in lots of different areas around the world. And that means that people who feel the same way can more readily connect and speak about racing and speak about animal welfare, animal rights. Just one other thing, by the way, sorry, just to take us back to the national. But again, a caller mentioned lowering the fences, 2 callers did, and rock hard ground. Well, I mean, it wasn't rock hard ground. The ground is irrigated at Aintree to make sure that it is on the softer side of good, and that is a specific intention by Aintree to ensure that it slows the horses down, and that there is an increased risk the quicker the ground is. And for a long period of time now, as long as I can virtually remember, horse racing, particularly jump racing, has looked to take place on ground that is on the soft side, again as a factor in order to reduce the risk of injury. And in terms of lowering the fences, I'm afraid that would actually have the opposite effect. If you imagine yourself running over a series of obstacles, the bigger the obstacle is, the more you would have to slow down in order to negotiate it. And if you actually went quicker, that would be a risk of greater. I mean, the scientific data shows that in terms of horse racing, that would actually be a greater risk to the horse, not a lesser risk.
So, I mean, listening to you, and it's a very fair outlining of racing's very sincere, I think, efforts to make the sport safer for the horses. There is probably just ultimately a pinch point whereby there's very little more that can be done and horses will still die. And you got to the nub of the argument perhaps when you said that they are work animals as opposed to pets. Would it be if we were to try and predict the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, would it be your sense that attitudes will continue to veer away from horse racing and these animals have been used as work animals, and death is a very unfortunate but real consequence of that, and that racing will find itself increasingly marginalised? Do you see the direction of travel in that sense as pretty much near impossible to turn around?
No, I don't, because I feel that there is a positive message to impart, and I don't feel that this has been done strongly and strategically enough by horse racing. On average, there are about 90,000 runners per year in British horse racing, and 99.8% of them complete without fatality, race without any kind of anything like that happening to them. And these are horses, you heard Sir A.P. McCoy and Mick Fitzgerald talking about the level of care. This is often seen as some kind of cliche, but it's not. These are elite animals, elite athletes, and like humans would, they receive that level of specialist care, specialist exercise. It means that they are particularly well. They are very, very well looked after. And, if we look at animals in the world and those that are very well cared for and those that are neglected and living miserably, it's not the horses that are bred for the task of racing, who are looked after by the sport, because the sport needs them to be happy, healthy horses, because that's the fundament of the sport. If you compare that, these are horses that are animals that are well cared for. At the other end, it is daily neglect, often through a lack of money or circumstances whereby an animal slips through the net. That is the area that I think that people who are really genuinely interested in animal welfare should be focused upon. And I think there's a lot more that connects people who are concerned about animals and the racing industry than perhaps many of the protesters think, because we in horse racing, you would not want suffering. Life is the important thing, and these 99.8% of runners every year live happy, healthy, well tended for lives, and that is where I think we should be focused on. And then at the same time, you say it's impossible to reduce risk entirely. Well, there are some things that further things that can be done. That introduction of the white trimmings, as I mentioned, to the hurdles and fences, that was just something that came forward from the Horse Welfare Board, which is an independently chaired body that look into how risk and can be improved in horse racing, and how horses fare from, inverted commas, cradle to grave. So there's a load of things that they are focused on, one of which is the jump racing risk model, and that has received funding. There's going to be close working with the Royal Veterinary College. That was agreed last December. It's going to be a project that looks into, I'm just checking my facts here, they've already had a look at data from the 1st of January 2009 to the 31st of December 2018, and by the end of this season they'll be bringing it up to date. And that will be the scientific analysis of this by experts who are used to evaluating epidemiology. The specialists in this area can bring about areas in which risk is further reduced, and we may be at the point of marginal gains, because you can't remove risk in sport in the same way as you can't remove risk in life. But the sport of horse racing is interested in making those marginal gains all the time that they can.
Where, in your opinion, is the industry when it comes to horses that are no longer competitive and their treatment of those horses?
I think that that can be improved. I think it has been improved a great deal. Traceability has improved quite a bit in recent years. The problem comes when a horse immediately retires and then may move from person to person to person. But I think that is an area that horse racing needs to focus on. I commend it for the work that it has done, the improvements that it's made. For example, there was something of a myth that racehorses couldn't be, retrained to be eventers or show jumpers or dressage horses or even happy hackers because they were just too high mettle to be able to do that. Well, that myth has very much been dispelled by retraining of racehorses. In fact, it's quite the opposite because racehorses are such in good health, are such good athletes and are used to being trained. They're actually really good candidates for a second life, a second career.
And maybe it's not possible to answer, Lydia, but if anyone knows, you would. What percentage of thoroughbred competitive horses do get a good second life, and what percentage either fall into neglect or are simply just taken to the knacker's yard, to be blunt about it?
I don't know. I think that this is an area which can be improved. It has been improved by the microchipping of horses, right. So they are more easily to be traceable. But that is not a foolproof thing at all. So again, I would say that this is an area that the sport needs to concentrate its funding and concentrate its ideas in. And I'm encouraged to do so because, again, in the 5-year strategy put forward by the Horse Welfare Board, A Life Well Lived, it specifically has elements where it talks about traceability, it talks about thoroughbred welfare database, it talks about aftercare and training and education. There are specific 5-year plans to ensure that horse racing improves in these areas, and they are already underway. And I would urge the industry to redouble its efforts in those areas and to make sure that it's appropriately funded.
Yes, because as a final thought, even it's funny, in The Guardian, one of the animal rising spokespeople, Alex Lockwood, wrote a piece, and as you say, they are an animal rights group, so he is every bit as concerned with the 1.2 billion animals which are bred and killed for food purposes as he is with racing. Now, and yet you put that next to the callers we heard on BBC. I don't know what percentage of them go and buy their chicken and their meat in the local shop. I dare say quite a few do, and will continue to do so, because even though in their heart of hearts they probably know the treatment of those animals hasn't always been pristine, they quite like their grub and they're going to keep doing that. Whereas horse racing, it will cost nothing for them for that to be banned, and maybe they feel better about it, and it's so emotive, and they see the horse dying on their television screens. This is the great fight that horse racing has on its hands.
Yeah, and yet there is no comparison with that, is there? I mean,
not in numerical terms, no.
You can't make an argument for the benefit of the animal about the meat industry.
And sorry, I'm not saying there isn't a hypocrisy at the heart of it, but it's just...
No, I know you're not.
It's a reality that I think is there for horse racing, and it will always be there.
I understand fully what you're saying, and I think it's a fair point. But I suppose you just have to point the reason of the argument. I mean, the best thing that the meat industry can say is that the animal involved has a good, albeit short, life. That's the best case scenario, isn't it? And I say that as a meat eater. I'm not saying it critically. I'm just saying it as a fact. Yeah. Whereas in horse racing, these are animals who are bred for an athletic task, who are very well cared for and prepared for that task. And the two things are just not comparable. But I take your point in terms of how does it touch people? How easy for them is it to side with one argument or another? I think too easy. But one thing I would say is that Animal Rising have spoken about wanting to ban horse racing. Well, that would immediately put 50,000 thoroughbreds who are currently alive in Britain, 14,000 in training, the rest in stud farms and affiliate premises. That would put them without a purpose. And who would take care of them? And they would fall into that most deleterious fate for all animals, which is that of neglect and living a miserable, painful, slow death, essentially, as opposed to the 99.8% horses who are terrifically well cared for. And also, the other thing that Animal Rising have admitted is that they want to see, one of the solutions to this is that they would want the breed to be stopped. So essentially, they're advocating the extinction of the thoroughbred. And it is fine to have those arguments. I fully support people's right to make the argument, to protest, as long as they're not putting other people at risk. But I do think it's beholden to be honest with people. And I think if the public weigh the facts, the quality of life of these horses against the idea that they would be extinct, I think if more people realise that is the end game of animal rights organisations such as Animal Rising, then I think that the argument would be less popular. So I think it's facts, and I think it's objective scientific improvements, and I think it's removing the emotion from the argument and having a look at what truly benefits the thoroughbred as a whole.